Some acts of courage change two lives forever in ways neither soul could ever imagine. In the Wyoming frontier of the 1880s, Elias Boone, a solitary mountain man, pulls a woman from a runaway stagecoach moments before death claims her. That woman is Eleanor Whitmore, one of the wealthiest widows west of the Mississippi. Grateful beyond words, she makes him an offer by firelight, 3 wishes, anything he desires. The town expects gold, land, or power. Instead, his requests leave everyone speechless. A warm meal cooked by her hand, a book to teach him to read, and a promise she'll never ride alone again. What kind of man asks for such humble things when he could have everything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Whitmore stood at the tall window of her study, watching the afternoon sun cast long shadows across Copper Hollow's main street. Her fingers absently turned the gold pocket watch that had belonged to her late husband, Thomas. 3 years he'd been gone, yet she still carried this piece of him everywhere, a weight both comforting and oppressive. The watch was beautiful, engraved with his initials and the date of their wedding. Sometimes she wondered if she kept it close out of love or obligation. The distinction had blurred over time, like so many things in her life. Copper Hollow sprawled below her estate on the hillside, a testament to Thomas's vision and ruthless business acumen. He'd built this town from a rough mining camp into something resembling civilization, though the veneer was thin. Saloons still outnumbered churches. The wealthy lived on the hill, the workers in rows of identical company houses near the mines. Thomas had owned most of it, and now Eleanor did. She turned from the window and set the watch on her desk with a soft click. The mahogany surface was covered with ledgers, contracts, and correspondence, the machinery of wealth that never stopped demanding attention. Since Thomas's death, she'd surprised everyone, including herself, by taking control of his business empire rather than selling it off or hiring a manager. The men on the town council had expected her to be a decorative figurehead. Instead, she'd studied every contract, questioned every expense, and made decisions that protected both profits and principles. It hadn't made her popular. Competent widows rarely were, Mrs. Whitmore. Martha's voice came from the doorway. Her housekeeper had been with her since the early days, one of the few people in Copper Hollow who'd known Eleanor before she became Mrs. Thomas Whitmore. Before the grand house and the weight of reputation. Yes, Martha. The solicitor is here about the Henderson property dispute. Shall I show him to the parlor? Eleanor nodded, straightening her black dress. She still wore mourning clothes, though the prescribed period had passed. They'd become a kind of armor, a way to keep the world at a respectful distance. Give me 5 minutes, then bring him up. Martha hesitated in the doorway. You look tired, Eleanor. You're working yourself too hard. Idle hands, Martha. Eleanor managed a small smile. Besides, the work keeps me sharp. The moment these men think I'm weakening, they'll try to take everything Thomas built. Everything Thomas built, Martha repeated softly. What about what you want to build? It was a question Eleanor had been avoiding for 3 years. What did she want? The question seemed almost foreign. Her life had been mapped out since birth, a good marriage, a proper household, children who never came. Thomas had been 20 years her senior, chosen by her father for his prospects. She'd been 18, full of vague dreams about adventure and purpose. Those dreams had been filed away like old correspondence, forgotten in the daily business of being Mrs. Whitmore. After Martha left, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of stillness. Through the window, she could see the mountains rising in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early autumn snow. Somewhere up there, men lived lives entirely unlike hers. Trappers, hunters, men who answered to no one. She'd heard stories about them in town, tales that were equal parts admiration and contempt. They came down from the high country once or twice a season to trade furs and supplies, then vanished back into the wilderness. One name came up more than others, Elias Boone. The accounts varied wildly. Some said he was 7 feet tall and could track a ghost. Others claimed he was half wild himself, raised by wolves or Indians, depending on who was telling the story. The more reliable sources, men who'd actually traded with him, described a quiet, capable man who kept to himself and knew the mountains better than anyone alive. Eleanor had seen him once, the previous spring. She'd been in the general store when he'd come in to trade a bundle of prime beaver pelts. He'd moved through the crowded space like water finding its path, neither hurried nor hesitant. Tall, yes, but not a giant. Weathered face, dark hair going grey at the temples, eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. He'd conducted his business in few words, accepted his payment, and left. What she remembered most was the silence he carried with him, not an awkward silence, but something peaceful, like the quiet of deep forest. It had been so different from the constant noise of her own life, the endless chatter of social obligations and business negotiations. She shook her head, dismissing the memory. What good did it do to think about mountain men and freedom? She had responsibilities, a position to maintain, and a town full of people who watched her every move. The solicitor's visit took an hour. The dispute about mineral rights as tedious as she'd expected. She made her position clear, offered a fair compromise, and sent him on his way with instructions to draw up the papers. Another small battle won, another day of holding on to what Thomas had built. As evening approached, Eleanor found herself in the library, her favorite room in the house. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held hundreds of volumes, more books than most frontier towns could boast. Thomas had been a collector, though she suspected he'd read fewer than half of them. They'd been status symbols to him, proof of cultivation and refinement, but Eleanor had read them. In the long evenings after Thomas's death, books had become her companions. She knew these shelves intimately. Philosophy and poetry, history and science, novels from England and France. Each volume was a window to a world beyond Copper Hollow, beyond the narrow confines of her prescribed life. She pulled down a worn copy of Walden and settled into the leather chair by the fireplace. Thoreau had lived deliberately, stripped life down to its essentials in his cabin by the pond. She envied that simplicity, even as she knew she'd never have the courage to pursue it. Her life was built on complexity, layers of obligation and expectation that couldn't be shed like an uncomfortable coat. Martha brought dinner on a tray. Eleanor rarely used the formal dining room anymore. They talked quietly about household matters, the upcoming harvest festival, the new minister's wife who thought herself quite grand. It was comfortable, familiar conversation that required nothing of Eleanor's heart. Later, alone again, Eleanor returned to the window. The town below had lit its lamps against the gathering darkness. From her vantage point, it looked almost beautiful, like scattered stars. But she knew the reality beneath the pretty lights, the grinding poverty of the mining families, the casual violence of the saloons, the rigid social hierarchy that kept everyone in their designated place. She'd been thinking more about escape lately, though she'd never admit it aloud. Not escape from responsibility exactly, but from the suffocating weight of other people's expectations. Sometimes she imagined simply walking away from all of it. The house, the business, the name that opened doors and closed others. She could go somewhere no one knew her, start fresh as just Eleanor, not Mrs. Thomas Whitmore. But these were foolish thoughts, the kind that came in quiet moments before sleep. She was 38 years old, a wealthy widow in a world that had very specific ideas about what such women should be and do. The best she could hope for was to manage her responsibilities with grace, and perhaps eventually find some measure of contentment in duty well performed. The pocket watch lay on the table beside her chair, its gold case catching the lamplight. She picked it up once more, feeling its familiar weight. Tomorrow would bring more ledgers, more disputes, more careful navigation of Copper Hollow's social currents. The day after that would be the same, and the day after that. This was her life, she told herself. This was enough. It had to be. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that a runaway stagecoach and a quiet mountain man would shatter the careful walls she'd built around herself. She had no way of knowing that 3 simple wishes would prove more transformative than all of Thomas's wealth and power combined. But that knowledge would come soon enough, in the dust and chaos of a frontier road, in the moment when death came close enough to touch and a stranger's hands pulled her back from the edge. The stagecoach to Blackwood Station left Copper Hollow every Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock sharp. Eleanor had taken this route dozens of times to visit the branch office of Whitmore Enterprises, always with her driver, Henry, and usually with Martha for company. But this Tuesday, Martha had a terrible cold, and Eleanor had business that couldn't wait. "You sure about this, Mrs. Whitmore?" Henry asked as he checked the horses' harnesses. "Weather's looking uncertain." Eleanor glanced at the sky. Clouds were building over the mountains, but the morning was still clear. "We'll be fine, Henry. It's only 3 hours to Blackwood." What she didn't mention was her growing restlessness, the feeling that she needed to break routine, even in some small way. Taking the regular stage instead of her private carriage felt like a tiny act of rebellion, though she knew how foolish that would sound if spoken aloud. The stage was already half full when she boarded, a miner and his wife heading to visit family, a traveling salesman with his cases, and a young woman Eleanor didn't recognize. They nodded politely, their expressions showing that mixture of respect and discomfort people always had around her. She was too wealthy to be friendly with, too powerful to ignore. The first hour passed uneventfully. The road followed the valley floor, winding between stands of pine and aspen. Eleanor watched the landscape roll past, her leather satchel on her lap containing the contracts she'd review in Blackwood. The other passengers dozed or chatted quietly. The rhythm of the wheels and the sway of the coach were almost hypnotic. Then everything went wrong at once. Later, Eleanor would piece together what happened. A rattlesnake, startled by the approaching stage, had struck at the lead horse. The animal reared and bolted, panicking the others. Henry fought the reins, shouting commands, but the frightened team was beyond control. The stage lurched forward, gaining speed on the downward slope. Inside, passengers were thrown against each other. The salesman's cases burst open, scattering goods across the floor. The miner's wife screamed. Eleanor grabbed for the window frame, trying to brace herself as the coach careened wildly. Through the window, she saw trees rushing past in a blur. The stage tilted sickeningly as it rounded a curve too fast. She heard Henry's voice, hoarse with effort, still trying to control the team. Then she heard something crack, wood splintering, and knew with terrible certainty that they were going to crash. Time seemed to slow and accelerate simultaneously. The stage left the road, bouncing over rough ground. Eleanor was airborne for a moment, weightless, then slammed back into the seat hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. Someone was praying aloud. The young woman was crying. And still the runaway team pulled them forward, faster, toward a line of trees that would end it all. Then a figure appeared alongside the racing horses, a man on a dark bay, riding hard. He leaned forward in the saddle, closing the distance with the lead horse. Eleanor watched through the chaos, unable to look away. She recognized him somehow, though she'd seen him only once before. Elias Boone. He rode like he'd been born on horseback, moving with the animal rather than simply controlling it. As he drew level with the lead horse, he reached out and grabbed its bridle, his strong hand closing over the leather. His own horse dug in, pulling against the momentum. It wasn't enough. The team was too panicked, the weight of the stage too great. Elias shifted his grip, speaking to the horses in a voice too low for Eleanor to hear over the chaos. His bay shouldered against the led horse, forcing it toward a clearing ahead, where the ground leveled out. Eleanor saw what he was doing, giving them space to slow down, steering them away from the trees. But the angle was wrong. As the stage turned, it began to tip. She felt the moment of imbalance, knew they were going over. "Hold on," someone shouted, and then the world was tumbling. The stage rolled once, twice. Eleanor's head struck something hard. There was a confusion of screams, breaking wood, the terrible sound of horses in distress. Then stillness, broken only by moaning and the settling of dust. Eleanor lay on her side, half buried under scattered luggage. Blood ran into her left eye from a cut on her forehead. Her ribs ached with each breath. But she was alive, conscious, and that seemed almost miraculous. "Don't move just yet." The voice was calm, steady, close to her ear. Hands, gentle but sure, checked her neck and spine. "Does anything feel broken?" She tried to speak, coughed on dust. "I don't think so." "Good, I'm going to help you out. Tell me if anything hurts sharp." The hands, Elias's hands, she realized, carefully shifted the luggage aside. He'd opened the stage door, which now faced skyward, and was reaching down to her. She took his offered arm, and he pulled her up with surprising ease, lifting her through the opening and setting her on solid ground. The world swayed. She would have fallen if he hadn't steadied her, one hand on her elbow. "Easy now. You hit your head pretty good." Eleanor looked around, taking in the scene. The stage lay on its side like a dying animal. The other passengers were climbing out, helped by Elias and Henry, who'd been thrown clear. The horses were tangled in their harnesses, but appeared mostly unhurt, and standing apart, holding the reins of his bay, was the man who'd saved them all. "You came out of nowhere," she said, her voice shaky. Elias had turned to help the miner's wife, but he glanced back, was tracking elk up the ridge, heard the commotion. It seemed impossible, the timing, the skill, the sheer courage of riding alongside a runaway stage. But here he was, moving from person to person, checking injuries with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd dealt with accidents before. His clothes were worn, his face weathered, but his hands were steady, and his voice remained that same unflappable calm. Henry approached Eleanor, his face pale. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. The snake, the horses, I couldn't hold them." "It wasn't your fault, Henry." She touched his arm. "Is everyone all right?" They took inventory. Bruises, cuts. The miner had a sprained wrist, but nothing worse. It could have been so much worse. It should have been worse. Eleanor found herself looking at Elias Boone, really seeing him for the first time. He was perhaps 40, tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from hard living rather than leisure. His dark hair needed cutting, his beard was untrimmed, and his clothes bore the patches and repairs of long use. But his eyes were clear and intelligent, and there was something in his bearing that suggested competence and self-sufficiency. He caught her staring and looked away, uncomfortable with the attention. "We need to get these folks to town," Henry said. "Stage is done for, but maybe we can rig something with the horses." "I'll ride ahead," Elias said. "Tell them to send a wagon." "Wait." Eleanor stepped forward, ignoring the way her head throbbed. "Mr. Boone, is it?" He nodded once, already gathering his reins. "You saved our lives, all of us. I want to thank you properly." "No need." He swung into his saddle with easy grace. "Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't. You did." Eleanor straightened despite her aching body, summoning the authority she used in business. "Please, come to my home this evening. Allow me to express my gratitude appropriately." For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. His expression suggested he found the whole idea uncomfortable. But something in her face, perhaps the determination or the slight trembling she couldn't quite control, made him pause. "All right," he said finally. "This evening." Then he was gone, his bay cantering toward Copper Hollow, leaving Eleanor standing in the settling dust with a head wound, bruised ribs, and a strange certainty that something fundamental had just shifted in her carefully ordered world. By the time the wagon arrived, and they made their slow way back to town, the story had already begun to spread. The wealthy widow and the mountain man, the miraculous rescue. By evening, half of Copper Hollow would have heard some version of the tale, each telling adding its own embellishments, but Eleanor barely noticed the gossip as Martha fussed over her injuries, and the doctor confirmed nothing was broken. She was thinking about the evening ahead, about what she could possibly say or offer to a man who'd risked his life for strangers and seemed to want nothing in return. She was thinking about his hands, gentle despite their calluses, and his voice, calm in the midst of chaos. She was thinking about how different he was from every man she'd known in her carefully structured life, and she was thinking about debts that couldn't be measured in money, and how sometimes the most important moments come when we least expect them. On a Tuesday morning in early autumn, in the dust and fear of a runaway stage, November brought early snow to the mountains and a new rhythm to Eleanor's life. The reading lessons continued 3 afternoons a week, and true to his third wish, Elias appeared whenever Eleanor needed to travel beyond Copper Hollow. He'd simply arrive, his bay saddled and ready, a spare horse in tow if she needed one. The town's gossip had evolved from scandalized whispers to resigned acceptance. If Mrs. Whitmore wanted to keep company with a mountain man, well, she'd earned the right to be eccentric. She'd proven herself capable of managing the Whitmore empire. If she wanted an unusual friendship, who were they to judge? But Eleanor knew it had become more than friendship, at least for her. She found herself thinking about Elias between their meetings, wondering what he was doing in his mountain cabin, whether he was warm enough, whether he had sufficient supplies for winter. She caught herself smiling at memories of his concentration as he worked through a difficult passage, or his rare laughter when she shared a story from her childhood. It was Martha who finally confronted her about it one evening after Elias had left. "Eleanor, you're falling in love with him." Eleanor looked up from the ledger she was pretending to review. "Martha, I don't deny it. I've known you too long." Martha sat down across from her, her expression kind but concerned. "I see how you light up when he arrives, how you take extra care with your appearance on lesson days, how you watch the window when you know he's due." Eleanor set down her pen, unable to maintain the pretense. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, yes. To him?" Martha shrugged. "Men can be remarkably blind about such things. But Eleanor, you need to think about what you're doing. He's a good man, I can see that. But he's not of your world. The differences, I know the differences." Eleanor's voice was sharper than she intended. "I know them every time he struggles with a word that comes easily to me. Every time he's uncomfortable in my parlor. Every time someone in town looks at him like he's some kind of curiosity. I know, Martha. Then what are you going to do about it?" That was the question, wasn't it? Eleanor had been avoiding it for weeks, letting herself drift in the pleasant haze of growing affection without considering where it might lead. But Martha was right to push her. Feelings like these didn't simply disappear because they were inconvenient. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. The next lesson day, Elias arrived with something wrapped in oilcloth. He set it on the reading table with a shy pride Eleanor had never seen in him before. "Made something for you," he said. "Figure you're always giving to me, teaching, feeding, treating me like I'm worth something." "Wanted to give back?" Eleanor unwrapped the cloth carefully. Inside was a hunting knife, but not like any she'd seen before. The blade was beautiful, folded steel that caught the light in patterns like water. The handle was carved from dark wood, fitted perfectly to the hand, inlaid with small pieces of bone in the shape of mountain flowers. "Elias, it's beautiful." She turned it carefully, admiring the craftsmanship. "You made this?" "Been working on it for a few weeks. The steel's from an old saw blade I traded for, tempered it myself. Wood's from a walnut tree that came down in last spring's storm." He pointed to the bone inlay. "Those are columbines. Caleb showed me how to carve when I was young. Said a man should know how to make things with his hands, not just kill things." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. The knife represented hours of careful work, skill passed down through generations, beauty created from rough materials. It was the opposite of her world, where everything could be bought, but little was made with such personal care. "I'll treasure it," she said, meaning it absolutely. "It's practical too," Elias added, seeming embarrassed by her emotion. "Good blade holds an edge. Might need it someday." They settled into their lesson, working through a story about westward expansion. Elias was progressing rapidly now, able to read full paragraphs with only occasional help. But today he seemed distracted, stumbling over words he'd mastered weeks ago. "What's wrong?" Eleanor finally asked, setting the book aside. Elias was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing the knife he'd given her where it lay on the table between them. "Been thinking about winter coming. Usually by now I'm up in my cabin, settled in for the cold months. Don't come down to town from December through March. Too much snow in the passes." Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known this was coming, of course. Mountain men didn't spend winters in town, but she'd been avoiding thinking about it, about what it would mean to not see Elias for 4 months. "When do you usually go up?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Week or 2, depending on the weather." He met her eyes. "Thing is, I'm not sure I want to go this year." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications. Eleanor's heart was racing, but she forced herself to think clearly. "Why not?" "You know why." His voice was rough. "These past weeks, coming here, talking with you, learning from you, it's been the best time of my life. Thought I was content up there alone, but now I know the difference. Now I know what I've been missing all these years." Eleanor wanted to reach across the table, to take his hand, to tell him she felt the same way. But years of caution held her back. "Elias, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between pot roast and pronouns, I fell in love with you, Eleanor Whitmore." He said it simply, without poetry or pretense. "I know I got no right to it. I know I'm not what a woman like you should want. But it's the truth, and I can't carry it alone anymore." The world seemed to stop. Eleanor heard her own heartbeat loud in the silence. She saw Martha's words from the night before. "You're falling in love with him." "Not falling. Already fallen. You have every right to it," she said quietly. "Because I love you too." Elias's eyes widened slightly, as if he hadn't dared hope to hear those words. He stood, and she stood, and then somehow they were in each other's arms, holding on like people who'd been drowning and finally found solid ground. His kiss was tentative at first, asking permission, even though it had already been granted. Eleanor kissed him back with all the loneliness and longing she'd been carrying for years. He tasted like pine and winter air, and his arms around her felt like safety and home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Elias cupped her face in his calloused hands. "What do we do now?" It was the practical question, the one that cut through the romance to the reality of their situation. Eleanor was one of the wealthiest women in the territory. Elias was a mountain man, with nothing but his skill and his integrity. The social chasm between them was vast, and love didn't automatically bridge it. "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, "but we'll figure it out, together." A sound from the hallway made them step apart. Martha appeared in the doorway, her expression knowing. "Mr. Clayton Voss is here to see you, Eleanor. He says it's urgent business." Eleanor felt the warmth of the moment evaporate, replaced by instinctive wariness. Clayton Voss had been circling her business interests for months, always with offers that seemed generous on the surface, but concealed disadvantageous terms. She'd refused him repeatedly, but he kept coming back. "Show him to the parlor," she said. "I'll be there in a moment." After Martha left, Elias picked up his hat. "I should go." "Let you handle your business." "No." Eleanor caught his arm. "Stay, please. This is Voss's 3rd visit this month, and I don't trust him. I'd feel better knowing you're nearby." Elias studied her face, then nodded. "I'll wait in the hall. He tries anything, he'll answer to me." The protectiveness in his voice warmed Eleanor, even as she prepared herself for whatever scheme Voss had brought this time. She smoothed her dress, straightened her spine, and became Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, businesswoman, widow, forced to be reckoned with. Clayton Voss rose when she entered the parlor. He was a handsome man in his 40s, well-dressed and well-spoken, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been truly tested. His smile was practiced, charming, and utterly without warmth. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for seeing me. I know you're busy. What can I do for you, Mr. Voss?" Eleanor remained standing, a subtle power play that forced him to remain standing as well. "I'll be direct. I'm putting together a consortium to develop the mineral rights in the North Valley. Your late husband's holdings include key parcels we need. I'm prepared to offer a very generous price." He named a figure that was indeed substantial. "I'm not interested in selling," Eleanor said. It was the same answer she'd given twice before. "I thought you might say that. So I've brought something else to sweeten the deal." He pulled a document from his jacket. "This is a survey showing that the northern boundary of your property is actually a 1/4 mile south of where you think it is. A previous survey was in error. If this is correct, and I have experts who will testify it is, you don't actually own the mineral rights you've been claiming." Eleanor felt ice form in her veins. She took the document, scanning it quickly. It looked official, complete with stamps and signatures. But something about it felt wrong, too convenient, too perfectly timed. "This is quite a claim, Mr. Voss. I'll need time to have my own surveyors review it." Of course. "But Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor?" He didn't wait for permission. "The legal battle over this could take years. Very expensive years. Whereas if you simply sell me the parcels at my offered price, we can avoid all that unpleasantness." There it was, the threat beneath the veneer of reasonableness. Sell or face a costly legal challenge that might tie up her assets indefinitely. "I'll have my attorney review your survey," Eleanor said coldly. "Good day, Mr. Voss." His smile hardened. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. I'm offering you a way out. Take it before the offer changes." "I said good day." Voss held her gaze for a long moment, then inclined his head slightly. "As you wish. But Eleanor, you should know that people are talking about you, about your association with that mountain man. It would be unfortunate if those rumors affected your standing in the business community. Partners do worry about scandal." The implied blackmail made Eleanor's blood boil, but she kept her expression neutral. "My personal associations are my own concern. And Mr. Voss, don't threaten me in my own home." After he left, Eleanor stood in the parlor, the survey document clutched in her hand, rage and fear warring inside her. Elias appeared in the doorway. "Heard most of that," he said quietly. "He's coming after you hard. He wants my land, and he's willing to use lies and intimidation to get it." Eleanor looked at the document again. "This survey is probably a forgery, but proving it will cost time and money. Or," Elias said slowly, "you get to the original survey records first. Make sure the truth is locked down tight before he can muddy the waters." Eleanor looked up at him, seeing not just the mountain man, but the strategic mind beneath. "The county records are in the territorial capital. 3 days' ride, then we ride," Elias said simply. "Soon as possible. Winter's coming, but we got a week or two before the passes close. Your third wish still stands. You don't ride alone." Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude and love so strong it almost overwhelmed her. Here was a man willing to risk a dangerous journey, to stand beside her against threats he had no stake in, simply because he loved her. "Tomorrow," she decided. "We leave tomorrow." That evening, Eleanor sat in her study with Martha and her attorney, Samuel Pierce, reviewing Thomas's land deeds. The documents were old, some dating back 15 years to when Thomas had first staked his claims in the territory. The northern boundary in question had been surveyed twice, both times showing the same line. "This survey Voss produced is suspicious," Samuel said, adjusting his spectacles. "The signatures don't quite match the official surveyors from that period. But proving forgery in court could take months, which is exactly what he wants," Eleanor said. "Tie me up in litigation while he consolidates support from other landowners. By the time I prove he's lying, he'll have enough backing to force a sale." "There's another concern," Samuel hesitated. "The town council meeting next week. Voss has been lobbying for a vote on right-of-way access through various properties, including yours. If he can convince the council that your boundary claims are disputed, they might grant access based on the alternative survey." Martha, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "Can he do that? Just bring a fake survey and have it accepted? If enough council members are in his pocket, yes." Samuel looked at Eleanor gravely. "I hate to say it, but Clayton Voss has been very generous with certain council members lately. New horses, business loans, social invitations. He's building influence." Eleanor felt the trap closing around her. Voss wasn't just attacking her property rights, he was undermining her position in the community, isolating her politically while threatening her reputation through gossip about Elias. "Then I need to get to the territorial capital before the council meeting," she said. "Secure certified copies of the original surveys, talk to the territorial surveyor, establish the documented truth beyond any question." "That's only 5 days, Eleanor," Martha said. "The capital is 3 days hard riding in good weather, and with winter storms coming. I know the risks." Eleanor thought of Elias's offer, his steady presence. "But I'm not going alone. Elias Boone, will guide me through the mountain passes. He knows routes that will cut travel time." Samuel and Martha exchanged glances. The attorney cleared his throat delicately. "Mrs. Whitmore, I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but 3 days on the trail, just you and Mr. Boone. The talk in town is already—" "I don't care about the talk," Eleanor interrupted, then softened her tone. "Samuel, Martha, I appreciate your concern, but my reputation is already being attacked by Voss. Trying to protect it now while losing my land holdings would be foolish. I'd rather be scandalous and solvent than proper and bankrupt." Martha smiled despite her worry. "You sound more like yourself every day." "The Eleanor I knew before you married Thomas was never one to let propriety stop her." After they left, Eleanor went to her bedroom and began packing for the journey. She selected practical clothing: riding skirts, warm jackets, sturdy boots. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed wealth. She'd be traveling rough country, and Elias had made clear they'd need to move fast. She packed the knife he'd made her, touched by the symbolism of carrying his gift into potential danger. The blade was beautiful, but it was also functional, exactly like Elias himself. A soft knock at the door, and Martha entered with a small leather pouch. "Supplies for the journey. Dried meat, hardtack, tea, medical supplies. And this." She handed Eleanor a small pistol. "Thomas's Derringer. I know you know how to use it." Eleanor did know. Her father had insisted she learn to shoot, much to her mother's horror. She'd been a decent shot as a girl, though she hadn't held a gun in years. The weight of the Derringer in her hand felt both foreign and familiar. "Thank you, Martha." She tucked it into her bag. "For everything. For staying when I became difficult. For speaking truth when I needed to hear it." "Oh, Eleanor." Martha embraced her quickly. "You've never been difficult. Cautious, perhaps. Trapped in someone else's idea of who you should be. But these past months, watching you with Elias, teaching him, laughing with him, you've been coming back to yourself. Don't lose that, whatever happens with the land or the gossip or anything else." In the morning, Elias arrived with 2 horses packed for mountain travel. He'd clearly spent the night preparing. The animals were well fed and rested, the packs balanced and secured, bedrolls tied efficiently. He'd even brought a waterproof oilskin for Eleanor's documents. "Check the weather," he said, helping her secure her bags. "There's a storm building, but if we move fast, we can stay ahead of it. I know a route through Widow's Pass that cuts a day off the main road. Steep, but your horse can handle it." Eleanor mounted, feeling a thrill of something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine adventure. Yes, the stakes were serious, but there was also freedom in leaving Copper Hollow behind, in trusting Elias completely, in acting rather than simply reacting. They rode out as the sun was rising, turning the autumn landscape gold and crimson. Several townspeople watched them leave, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Eleanor saw Mrs. Pemberton, the minister's wife, shake her head sadly. She saw Clayton Voss watching from the window of the land office, his face unreadable. Let them watch, Eleanor thought. Let them judge. She was done living for their approval. Once they were beyond town, Elias set a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horses. He rode slightly ahead, reading the land with the unconscious skill of someone who'd spent his life in wilderness. Occasionally he'd point out things, an eagle's nest high in a dead tree, tracks that indicated a bear had passed recently, the distant smudge of smoke that meant a trapper's cabin. They stopped at midday beside a creek. Elias built a small fire and made coffee while Eleanor stretched her sore muscles. She hadn't ridden this far in years, and her body was reminding her of that fact. "Doing all right?" Elias asked, handing her a tin cup of strong, bitter coffee. "I'll survive." Eleanor sipped gratefully. "This is beautiful country. I'd forgotten what it's like outside of town. It gets better higher up. Wait until you see the pass at sunset." He sat beside her on a fallen log. "Eleanor, about what's happening with Voss. You know he's not going to stop, even if you prove this survey is false. Men like him, they don't give up easy." "I know. She'd been thinking about this all morning. He wants my land because it controls access to the northern valley. Without it, his consortium can't develop the mining claims they've purchased. I'm the key piece, and he'll keep pushing until I break or sell, or until someone makes him stop." Elias said it quietly, but there was steel underneath. Eleanor touched his arm. "Elias, I won't have you fighting my battles with violence. That's not who you are, and it's not how we'll solve this. I know. But if he threatens you, if he tries anything—" Elias's jaw tightened. "I'm just saying there's lines that shouldn't be crossed." They rode on through the afternoon, climbing steadily into the mountains. The air grew colder, thinner. Pine forests gave way to rocky slopes dotted with hardy scrub. Eleanor found herself breathing hard, her city-soft lungs adjusting to the altitude. As the sun began to set, they reached a wide ledge that looked out over miles of forest and valley. Elias had been right. The view was breathtaking. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of orange and purple, and Eleanor could see all the way back to where Copper Hollow sat, small and distant. "We'll camp here tonight," Elias said. "There's an overhang that'll shelter us if the weather turns. Water source just down the slope." He set up camp with efficient movements, while Eleanor gathered firewood, both of them falling into an easy partnership. When the fire was burning and coffee was brewing, they sat together watching the last light fade from the sky. "You're good at this," Eleanor said. "Taking care of things, making it all seem simple. It is simple up here. You, me, the mountain. No politics, no social rules, no Clayton Voss trying to cheat his way to fortune." Elias poked the fire with a stick. "Sometimes I think the whole world would be better if people just dealt straight with each other. Honest work, honest words. That's because you're a good man, Elias. You assume others are the same." "Maybe." He looked at her across the fire, his face half in shadow. "Or maybe I just never cared enough about people to see their faults. Easier to be alone than to deal with all the complications. What changed?" Eleanor asked softly. "You," he said it simply, without embarrassment. "You made me want to be part of the world again. Made me want to build something instead of just surviving." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. She moved around the fire to sit beside him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one, neither needing to speak. Tomorrow they'd face the difficult terrain of Widow's Pass. The day after, they'd reach the capital and confront whatever legal challenges awaited. But tonight, in the firelight and mountain air, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt free, whatever happened with the land. With Voss, with her reputation in Copper Hollow, she knew one truth absolutely. She loved Elias Boone, and that love was worth fighting for. They reached the territorial capital on the afternoon of the third day, having pushed hard through Widow's Pass and down into the lower valleys. Eleanor was exhausted, her muscles aching from days in the saddle, but there was no time to rest. The council meeting was in 2 days, and she needed those certified surveys. The territorial office was housed in a squat stone building near the center of town. Eleanor and Elias tied their horses and climbed the steps, both dusty and trail-worn. The clerk at the desk looked up, his expression showing surprise at their rough appearance. "We need to access land survey records," Eleanor said, pulling her documentation from the oilskin pouch. "Northern Wyoming Territory, Copper Hollow region, Thomas Whitmore Holdings." The clerk examined her papers, then nodded slowly. "That'll take some time to pull from the archives. Maybe an hour or two. We'll wait." They sat on a hard wooden bench while the clerk disappeared into the back rooms. Elias stretched his long legs, looking uncomfortable in the official building. "Never been much for government offices," he muttered. "All that paperwork and rules. Unfortunately, paperwork and rules are what will save my land," Eleanor replied. She was nervous, though she tried not to show it. Everything depended on these records, matching what Thomas had filed years ago. When the clerk finally returned, he was carrying several thick folders and wore a puzzled expression. "Mrs. Whitmore, there's something odd here. The surveys for your property are all in order, boundaries exactly where you claim. But there's another file attached. Tagged for your attention, delivered just yesterday." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "Delivered by whom?" "A courier from Copper Hollow. Paid extra for expedited service." The clerk set a sealed envelope on the counter. "Said you'd be coming and would want to see this right away." Elias moved closer as Eleanor opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a marriage certificate, old, yellowed with age but apparently official. The names made her breath catch. Thomas Whitmore and Catherine Miller, married in St. Louis, Missouri, dated 6 months before Eleanor's own wedding. "That's not possible," she whispered, but there was more. A letter, written in an unfamiliar hand. Eleanor read it aloud, her voice barely steady. "Mrs. Whitmore, or should I say Miss Ashford. The attached certificate proves that Thomas Whitmore was already married when he wed you. That makes your marriage invalid, and under territorial law you have no claim to his estate. Everything you think you own belongs to his legitimate heir, his daughter from his first marriage. I represent that daughter, and we will be pursuing full recovery of the Whitmore holdings. You have been living a lie for 20 years. I suggest you prepare yourself for the legal consequences. Respectfully, Clayton Voss, attorney at law." The room seemed to tilt. Eleanor grabbed the counter to steady herself. Elias's hand was on her back, supporting her, but she barely felt it. If this certificate was real, if Thomas had been married before— "Let me see that." Elias took the certificate gently from her trembling hands. He studied it for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Then he held it up to the light from the window. "Eleanor, I may not read fancy, but I know something about documents. Spent years looking at fur trading contracts, learning to spot the ones that were fake. This paper, it doesn't look right." The clerk leaned in. "What do you mean?" "The ink here where the names are written. It's darker, fresher than the printed parts. And look." Elias pointed to the seal at the bottom. "This seal is pressed into the paper, but the edges are too clean. Old seals, they blur a bit, the wax cracks. This looks new." Eleanor felt a surge of hope mixed with fury. "You think it's a forgery?" "I think someone's working hard to make you believe your whole life has been a lie," Elias said. "And I think they want you scared and confused enough to not fight back." The clerk examined the certificate more carefully. "He might be right. We could send this to the authenticators, but that would take weeks. I don't have weeks." Eleanor's mind was racing. "The council meeting is in 2 days. Even if this is fake, Voss can use it to cast doubt on my claims. People will wonder, gossip, assume." She stopped, feeling tears of frustration threatening. "He's not just trying to take my land. He's trying to destroy everything I am." "No," Elias said firmly. "He's trying to make you think you're destroyed. There's a difference. Eleanor, look at me." She met his eyes, seeing strength and certainty there. "Whatever this paper says, whatever lies Voss is spreading, it doesn't change who you are. You're Eleanor Whitmore. You've run that business for 3 years with more integrity than your husband showed in 20. You've helped people, stood up for what's right, kept that town going. A piece of paper doesn't erase that. But if my marriage was invalid, then you still built everything that matters on your own. The question isn't whether you were legally married. The question is, are you going to let Voss win?" Eleanor drew a shaky breath. He was right. She couldn't fall apart now, couldn't let fear and uncertainty paralyze her. That was exactly what Voss wanted. "What do we do?" she asked. Elias turned to the clerk. "Is there a way to check if this Catherine Miller actually existed? If Thomas Whitmore ever filed any other marriage certificates?" The clerk nodded slowly. "We keep records of all territorial marriages, deaths, land claims. If there was a first wife, there might be other documents, death certificate, property transfers, something. Then we look," Eleanor said, her voice steadier now. "We search everything, and we find proof that this is a lie." They spent the next 3 hours in the archives, going through dusty files and record books. The clerk, warming to the detective work, pulled records from St. Louis, cross-referencing dates and names. Elias, despite his limited reading, helped organize documents chronologically while Eleanor took notes. Finally, as the afternoon sun was slanting low through the windows, the clerk made a small noise of discovery. Here, Catherine Miller did exist. Born 1831, married— He paused, checking another document. Married Peter Sawyer in 1852, died 1859 in childbirth. There's no record of her ever marrying anyone named Whitmore. And Thomas? Eleanor asked urgently. Only one marriage certificate on file for Thomas Whitmore, dated 1863 to Eleanor Ashford. The clerk looked up. "Your marriage, Mrs. Whitmore, the legitimate one." Eleanor felt a wave of relief so strong it made her dizzy. "Then the certificate Voss sent is a forgery. He took a real person's name, created a fake marriage record, and tried to use it to invalidate my claim." "That's fraud," the clerk said. "Serious fraud. You could have him arrested. First, I need proof." Eleanor's mind was working again, sharp and clear. "Certified copies of the real records. Documentation showing Catherine Miller's actual marriage and death. Everything that proves Voss is lying. I can prepare those for you. They'll be ready by tomorrow morning." As they left the office, Eleanor felt exhausted, but also strangely energized. Voss had shown his hand, revealed the depths he was willing to sink to. But in doing so, he'd also made himself vulnerable. Fraud was a criminal matter. She could do more than just defend her property. She could destroy him. They took a room at a modest hotel. Propriety be damned. Eleanor was too tired to care what anyone thought, and Elias wasn't leaving her side. They ordered food sent up and ate in silence, both processing what they'd learned. "He's desperate," Elias said finally. "Men don't forge marriage certificates unless they're out of other options." "But why?" Eleanor set down her fork. "My land is valuable, yes, but surely not worth risking criminal charges. What's so important about the Northern Valley that he'd go this far? Maybe it's not about the land itself. Maybe it's what's under it." Elias looked thoughtful. "You said he wants mineral rights. What if there's more there than just copper and silver? What if he knows something about those mountains that others don't?" Eleanor pulled out a map from her document case, spreading it on the small table. She traced the boundary of her holdings with her finger. The Northern Valley. Thomas surveyed it 15 years ago, but never developed it. Said the terrain was too rough, the ore quality uncertain. But what if he was wrong? What if Voss has had his own surveys done? Or what if someone found something up there recently? Elias suggested. Goldstrike, maybe. Or one of those new metals they're using in the railroads. Something valuable enough to make a man willing to commit fraud, bribery, and who knows what else. They sat in silence, both thinking. Finally, Eleanor folded the map. "Tomorrow we get the certified documents. Then we ride back to Copper Hollow as fast as we can. I need to get these to Samuel before the council meeting. And then..." Elias asked, "And then we expose Clayton Voss for what he is, a liar and a fraud. We show the council that he's been manipulating them, using forged documents and false claims. We save my land and my reputation." "Our land," Elias said softly. "Our reputation. I'm in this with you now, Eleanor. All the way." She reached across the table and took his hand. His palm was rough, calloused from hard work and mountain living, but his grip was gentle. "I know, I don't think I could do this without you." "You could," he said with certainty. "You're stronger than you know, but you don't have to. Not anymore." That night, lying in bed in the small hotel room, Eleanor stared at the ceiling and thought about lies and truth. Thomas had lied to her in small ways throughout their marriage, about business dealings, about where his money came from, about his feelings. She'd always sensed it but had been too proper, too afraid to confront him. Now someone was lying about her entire life, trying to rewrite her history for profit. But unlike with Thomas, she wasn't going to accept it quietly. She wasn't going to be the obedient, silent wife anymore. She was going to fight, and thanks to a mountain man who'd entered her life asking only for simple things, a meal, a book, a promise, she finally had someone standing beside her who told the truth. No matter how rough or uncomfortable it might be, outside, a storm was building over the mountains. Eleanor could hear the wind picking up, feel the pressure change in the air. They'd need to leave early, ride hard through challenging weather, but she wasn't afraid. Fear had ruled too much of her life already. It was time for something different. It was time for courage and truth and the kind of love that made you stronger rather than smaller. Whatever came next, she'd face it with Elias beside her. And that made all the difference. They left the capital before dawn, the certified documents safely wrapped in oilskin and secured in Eleanor's saddlebag. The storm Elias had predicted was rolling in from the west, dark clouds building over the mountain peaks. They needed to reach Copper Hollow before the council meeting tomorrow afternoon, which meant pushing the horses harder than was safe and navigating through weather that could turn deadly. "We've got maybe 18 hours before that storm hits full force," Elias said as they rode out. "If we can make it through the lower pass before then, we'll be all right. But if we get caught in the high country—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eleanor had heard enough stories about travelers frozen to death in mountain blizzards. They rode at a punishing pace, stopping only to rest the horses and take quick bites of dried meat. The landscape flew past, forests giving way to rocky slopes, valleys narrowing into canyons. Eleanor's body ached from days in the saddle, but she gritted her teeth and kept pace with Elias. There was too much at stake to slow down. By midday, they'd reached the approach to Widow's Pass, the steep route Elias had used to cut time on their outward journey. The wind was picking up now, cold and sharp, carrying the scent of snow. "We need to talk about options," Elias said, pulling his horse alongside hers. "We can try to make it through the pass before the storm hits, or we can take the long route around. Long route adds 6 hours, but it's safer. Your call." Eleanor looked up at the pass. From here, it was a narrow cut between two peaks, the trail barely visible against the rock face. She could see clouds already obscuring the summit. Everything in her said it was dangerous, maybe foolish, to attempt it now, but she thought of Clayton Voss, sitting in Copper Hollow, confident that his forged documents had destroyed her. She thought of the council members he'd bribed and manipulated. She thought of Samuel and Martha, waiting anxiously for her return. And she thought of her land, her home, everything she'd worked for being stolen by a man who dealt in lies. "We go through the pass," she said. Elias studied her face, then nodded. "All right. Stay close to me. Watch where my horse steps and follow exactly. If I say stop, you stop. If I say go, you go. No questions, no hesitation. Agreed?" "Agreed." The climb up to the pass was treacherous. The trail switchbacked up the mountainside, barely wide enough for a single horse. On one side was solid rock, on the other a sheer drop into darkness. Eleanor forced herself not to look down, keeping her eyes fixed on Elias's back. The wind grew stronger as they climbed, whipping her hair and making the horses nervous. Snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Eleanor's hands grew numb despite her gloves. She could feel her horse's hesitation, the animal's instinctive fear of the narrow trail and rising storm. "Easy, girl," she murmured, patting the horse's neck. "Just a bit further." They were halfway through the pass when Eleanor heard the sound that would haunt her nightmares, the crack of breaking rock. Her horse reared in panic. Eleanor grabbed for the saddle horn, felt her seat slip. Time seemed to slow as she began to fall, the dark canyon opening beneath her. Then Elias was there. He'd somehow turned his horse on the narrow trail and grabbed her arm, his strong grip pulling her back from the edge. Her horse scrambled for purchase on the crumbling trail, and for a terrible moment Eleanor thought they'd all go over. "Steady." Elias's voice cut through her panic. "Don't fight it, just hold on." He pulled her toward him, half lifting her from her saddle. Her horse found solid footing and stopped thrashing. Eleanor found herself pressed against Elias's chest, breathing hard, her heart hammering. "You're all right," he said quietly. "I've got you." They stayed like that for a moment, the storm building around them. Then Elias released her gently. "Can you ride?" "We need to keep moving." Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. She settled back into her saddle, her hands shaking. That had been close, too close. Another second, and she would have fallen, and no one could have saved her. They continued through the pass, the storm intensifying with each step. Snow fell thick now, obscuring the trail. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Elias moved by instinct and memory, somehow finding the path even when Eleanor could barely see her own horse's head. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably less than one, they emerged on the far side of the pass. The trail widened, the worst danger behind them. Elias found a rock overhang where they could shelter and rest the exhausted horses. Eleanor dismounted on shaky legs. Reaction was setting in now. The terror of almost dying, the exhaustion of hard travel, the accumulated stress of the past days. She sank down against the rock wall, trying to control her shaking. Elias knelt beside her, checking her for injuries. "Eleanor, talk to me. I'm fine. Just give me a moment." She closed her eyes, focusing on breathing. In and out, in and out. Still alive. "Still fighting. You did good back there," Elias said. "Kept your head when it mattered." "A lot of people would have panicked. I almost fell off a mountain, Elias. I don't think that qualifies as keeping my head." Rock gave way. "Wasn't your fault. He was building a small fire with wood he'd somehow kept dry in his pack. And you didn't freeze up after. That takes strength." The fire caught, providing warmth and light against the storm's gloom. Eleanor moved closer to it, watching Elias work. He was methodical, efficient, making coffee and preparing food while she recovered. He'd saved her life again. First the runaway stage, now the pass. How many times could one person save another before the debt became unpayable? "Stop it," Elias said without looking up. "Stop what?" "Thinking you owe me something. I can see it on your face." He handed her a cup of coffee. "We're past debts and wishes, Eleanor. This is what people do when they love each other. They keep each other alive." Eleanor sipped the bitter coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. "I'm not used to that. Depending on someone. Thomas never—" She stopped, not sure how to explain. "He provided for me materially, but I never felt like he'd actually protect me. Not like you do." Then he was a fool. Elias sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "You're worth protecting, worth riding through storms for, worth everything." They sat in silence, watching the storm rage outside their shelter. Eleanor thought about the documents in her saddlebag, the proof of Voss's fraud. Tomorrow they'd reach Copper Hollow. Tomorrow they'd face the council. Tomorrow everything would change, one way or another. "What happens after?" she asked quietly. "After what?" "After we expose Voss, after we save the land. After all of this is done," she looked at him. "What happens to us?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. "I've been thinking about that. I love you, Eleanor. That's not going to change. But I don't fit in your world, not really. Mountain Man doesn't make sense in fancy parlors and business meetings. I don't care about parlors and business meetings. Not as much as I care about you. Maybe not now, when everything's urgent and dangerous. But what about in 6 months, a year? When life settles down, and you remember you're one of the wealthiest women in the territory, and I'm—" He gestured at himself, his rough clothes and weathered face. "I'm this." Eleanor felt anger flash through her, hot and sudden. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare diminish yourself like that. You're not this. You're the man who taught me what honesty looks like. The man who showed me that worth isn't measured in property deeds and social standing. You're the man I love, Elias Boone. And if you think I'm going to let you walk away because of some idea about what fits—" She stopped, overwhelmed by emotion. Elias was staring at her, surprise and something deeper in his expression. "I'm not going anywhere," he said finally. I needed to know you'd thought about it, about what choosing me means. It means choosing happiness over expectations. It means choosing truth over appearances. It means choosing a partner instead of living alone in a big house full of things that don't matter." Eleanor took his hand. "I've thought about it, Elias. I've thought about nothing else for weeks. And I choose you. Always you." He kissed her then, gentle and deep, tasting of coffee and snow and promises. When they pulled apart, both were smiling despite the storm, despite everything. "We should rest," Elias said. "Few hours, then we ride the last stretch." "Should make Copper Hollow by late morning." Eleanor nodded, suddenly exhausted. They arranged their bedrolls near the fire, and she fell asleep with Elias's arm around her. Feeling safer than she had in years, she dreamed of mountains and music, of a small cabin filled with books, of teaching children to read under pine trees. She dreamed of a life that was simpler but richer, quieter but fuller. She dreamed of home, not a grand house on a hill, but wherever Elias was. When she woke, grey dawn was filtering through the storm. The snow had stopped, leaving the world blanketed in white. Elias was already up, saddling the horses, checking their gear. He smiled when he saw her awake, ready for the final stretch. Eleanor stood, brushing off snow, and checked her saddlebag. The documents were still safe, wrapped tight against the weather. Everything they needed to prove Voss was a fraud, to save her land, to start their future. "Ready," she said. They mounted and rode out into the fresh snow, leaving the shelter behind. The trail down from the pass was easier now, the storm spent. They moved quickly, urgently, knowing that somewhere ahead, Clayton Voss was preparing his final play, confident he'd already won. But he didn't know about the documents. He didn't know Eleanor had proof of his fraud. He didn't know that the woman he'd tried to destroy was riding toward him with truth as her weapon and a mountain man as her shield. By noon, they could see Copper Hollow in the valley below. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved about their business, unaware that everything was about to change. "Last chance to turn back," Elias said, only half joking. Eleanor looked at her town, her home, her responsibility, her future. Then she looked at Elias, seeing the man who'd changed everything simply by being honest, by being present, by being himself. "Forward," she said. "Always forward." They rode down the mountain together toward truth and confrontation, toward the end of one story and the beginning of another. Whatever happened in the next hours, they'd face it together, and that, Eleanor realized, was the only certainty she needed. The town council met in the church hall, the only building in Copper Hollow large enough to accommodate both the council members and the concerned citizens who'd come to witness the proceedings. Eleanor arrived with Elias at her side, both still dusty from hard travel, but carrying themselves with quiet determination. The room fell silent as they entered. Eleanor felt dozens of eyes on her, heard the whispers start immediately. She ignored them, walking straight to the front where Samuel Pierce waited, his face showing relief at her arrival. "Thank God," Samuel whispered. "Voss has been holding court for the past hour, poisoning the well. Half the council is ready to vote in his favor without even hearing your side." Eleanor pulled the documents from her saddlebag and handed them to him. Certified copies from the territorial office. Every survey, every filing, every piece of documentation proving my boundaries are exactly where I've always claimed. And more, proof that the documents Voss has been circulating are forgeries. Samuel's eyes widened as he quickly scanned the papers. "Eleanor, this is everything we need. We can destroy his case completely. That's the plan." Eleanor turned to look at the council table where 7 men sat, Clayton Voss standing beside them like he already owned the room. He saw her, and for just a moment, she saw surprise flash across his face before he smoothed it into his usual confident smile. Mayor Harrison called the meeting to order, his gavel striking the table with authority. "We're here to discuss right-of-way access through the Whitmore holdings in the Northern Valley. Mr. Voss has presented a survey suggesting that the boundaries Mrs. Whitmore claims are in error. Mrs. Whitmore has requested time to respond." "The floor is yours, ma'am." Eleanor stood, Elias rising beside her. She'd faced many challenges in the past 3 years. Hostile business partners, difficult negotiations, the weight of running an empire she'd never been trained to manage. But this felt different. This was personal. This was her home, her honor, her future. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice clear and steady, "Mr. Voss has indeed presented documents challenging my property boundaries. What he hasn't told you is that those documents are fraudulent." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Voss stepped forward, his smile gone. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Whitmore. I hope you can back it up." "I can." Eleanor nodded to Samuel, who began distributing copies of the territorial records to each council member. "These are certified documents from the territorial office in the capital. They show definitively that my boundaries are exactly as I've always claimed. The surveys Mr. Voss presented were never filed with the territory, were never authenticated by official surveyors, and contain signatures that don't match any surveyor on record." Council member Josiah Webb, a man Thomas had trusted, examined the documents carefully. "These do appear legitimate. Official seals, proper signatures. But Mrs. Whitmore, how do we know Mr. Voss's documents aren't simply an alternative survey?" "Because," Eleanor said, "there's no record of them ever being commissioned or conducted. And because Mr. Voss went even further in his attempts to defraud me and this council." She pulled out the forged marriage certificate, holding it up for all to see. This was delivered to the territorial office, timed to arrive just before I did. It purports to show that my late husband had a previous wife, which would invalidate my marriage and my inheritance. The problem is, it's a complete fabrication. Voss's face had gone pale, but he rallied quickly. You can't prove that. Actually, I can. Samuel stood, reading from the documents Eleanor had gathered. Catherine Miller did exist. She married Peter Sawyer in 1852 and died in 1859. She never married Thomas Whitmore. The certificate is a forgery, using a real person's name, but false information. Mr. Voss, you didn't just attempt fraud. You attempted to destroy Mrs. Whitmore's entire life and reputation based on lies. The room erupted. Council members were shouting questions. Citizens were demanding explanations. Voss was trying to speak over the chaos, but his words were lost in the noise. Mayor Harrison pounded his gavel repeatedly. "Order, I will have order." When the room finally quieted, he turned to Voss with an expression of cold fury. "Mr. Voss, these are serious allegations. Do you have any explanation?" Voss's composure was cracking. Eleanor could see sweat beading on his forehead, see the calculation in his eyes as he tried to find a way out. "The documents I received came from reliable sources. If they're fraudulent, I'm as much a victim as Mrs. Whitmore." "You delivered them," Eleanor interrupted. "You timed their arrival. You knew exactly what you were doing. And I want to know why. My land is valuable, yes, but not valuable enough to risk criminal charges for fraud. What's really in that northern valley, Mr. Voss? What are you so desperate to hide?" For a moment, she thought he'd continue lying. Then something in his expression changed, from calculation to desperation to finally a kind of reckless abandon. He'd been caught and he knew it. The question now was how far he'd fall. "You want to know what's up there?" His voice was bitter. "Gold. Not the played-out traces we've been mining for years, but a major vein. My geologists found it 6 months ago on what we thought was unclaimed land. Then we discovered it was actually on your property, Mrs. Whitmore. Your precious Thomas had no idea what he was sitting on." The room went dead silent. Eleanor felt her heart hammering. Gold. A major strike on her land. That explained everything, the pressure, the fraud, the desperation. "So you decided to steal it," she said quietly. "Through forgery, bribery, and lies." Voss laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You think you're so much better than me? Your husband built his fortune on shady deals and broken promises. At least I'm honest about my dishonesty." "No," Eleanor said. "You're just desperate. And you failed." Mayor Harrison stood, his face grave. "Mr. Voss, by the authority vested in me, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted fraud and forgery. Sheriff, please escort Mr. Voss to the jail." Council members, I think we can safely say that Mrs. Whitmore's property boundaries are confirmed as legitimate. This meeting is adjourned. As the sheriff moved to arrest Voss, the man's desperation transformed into something darker. He jerked away from the sheriff's reaching hand and pulled a small pistol from inside his coat. "Nobody's arresting me," he snarled, backing toward the door. "I've put too much into this, risked too much. That gold should be mine." The room erupted in chaos. People scrambled for cover. Council members dove under the table. Eleanor felt Elias's hand on her arm, pulling her behind him, placing his body between her and the gun. "Put it down, Voss," the sheriff said, his own weapon drawn now. "Don't make this worse than it already is." "Worse?" "It's already over." Voss's hand was shaking, the gun wavering. "Do you know how much money I owe? How many people I've borrowed from to finance this venture? If I don't deliver that land, I'm a dead man anyway." Eleanor saw the wildness in his eyes, the look of a man with nothing left to lose. She knew she should stay behind Elias, stay safe, but something in her wouldn't allow it. She'd spent too much of her life hiding behind others, letting fear control her choices. "Mr. Voss," she said, stepping forward despite Elias's attempt to stop her. "This isn't the way. You've lost. Accept it with dignity." Dignity. Voss's laugh was slightly unhinged. "You talk about dignity. You who've been carrying on with a mountain man like some common—" "Careful," Elias said, his voice carrying a warning that made Voss stop mid-sentence. Finish that sentence, and gun or no gun, you'll answer to me." The two men stared at each other, tension thick in the air. Eleanor saw something she'd never seen in Elias before. Not violence exactly, but the capacity for it, held in check by will alone. He was a peaceful man by choice, but that didn't mean he was harmless. Voss must have seen it too, because he shifted the gun back toward the sheriff. "I'm walking out of here." "Anyone tries to stop me and someone gets hurt, you won't make it out of town," the sheriff said. "Be reasonable." But reasonable had left the building when Voss pulled the gun. He was backing toward the door now, his movements jerky with panic. Eleanor saw disaster unfolding. Someone would try to stop him, shots would be fired, people could die. "Wait," she heard herself say. "Mr. Voss, wait." Everyone looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. But an idea was forming, one that might save lives and solve the immediate crisis. "You want the gold that badly?" she asked. "Then let's make a deal." "Eleanor, no," Samuel started. But she held up a hand. "I'm listening," Voss said warily. "You put the gun down, submit to arrest, and cooperate fully with the investigation. In return, I'll sell you a small stake in the Northern Valley mining rights. Not control, not majority share, but enough that if the strike is as good as you say, you'll make back your investment and then some. Enough to pay your debts and start over." Voss stared at her. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm tired of men destroying themselves and others over money," Eleanor said honestly. "Because my late husband built his fortune on broken promises, and I'd like to build mine differently. And because right now you're going to shoot someone or be shot yourself, and I'd rather nobody die today." "She's offering you a way out," Elias added quietly. "More mercy than you deserve." "I'd take it." For a long moment Voss stood frozen, the gun still in his hand. Eleanor could see him calculating, trying to find the trap in her offer. But there was no trap, just a genuine chance at redemption he probably didn't deserve, but desperately needed. Slowly, very slowly, he lowered the gun. The sheriff immediately moved in, taking the weapon and securing Voss's hands behind his back. The room released a collective breath. "You mean it?" Voss asked Eleanor as the sheriff led him past her. "The stake in the mining rights?" "I mean it. But you'll sign a full confession first, acknowledging the fraud and forgery. And you'll tell me everyone you bribed or paid off in this scheme. Complete honesty or the deal is void." Voss nodded slowly. All right, I'll cooperate." As the sheriff escorted him out, the room remained stunned into silence. Then Mayor Harrison cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, that was either very generous or very foolish. Maybe both," Eleanor admitted. "But I meant what I said. I'm tired of the way men like my husband and Mr. Voss do business, all greed and no compassion. If I have wealth and power, I'm going to use it differently." She turned to face the council and the assembled citizens. "Furthermore, when we develop that gold vein, the workers will receive fair wages and safe conditions. A percentage of the profits will go toward improving Copper Hollow. A real school, a hospital, better housing for the mining families. That land has made wealthy men for too long, while the people who do the actual work barely survive." "That stops now." The room erupted in applause. Not from the wealthy merchants and landowners, Eleanor noticed, but from the miners and their families, the shopkeepers and laborers. The people who'd been invisible in her husband's world were seeing themselves acknowledged in hers. Elias touched her elbow gently. "You sure about all this? That's a lot of money you're committing." Eleanor smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm sure. Money isn't much good if you can't sleep at night. Besides, I don't need millions. I just need enough. Enough for what?" She looked at him, this man who'd changed everything with 3 simple wishes. "Enough for us. A cabin somewhere between the town and the mountains. Books and a garden. Maybe teaching children to read, the ones whose parents can't afford tutors. A life that means something." Elias's expression softened. "That sounds perfect." As they walked out of the church hall together, Eleanor felt the weight of years lifting from her shoulders. She'd won, not just the legal battle, but something more important. She'd won the right to live on her own terms, to build a life based on love and purpose rather than duty and appearances. Behind them, she could hear the town already buzzing with gossip and speculation. The widow and the mountain man. The gold strike, the generous offer to a man who'd tried to destroy her. People would talk for years. Eleanor found she didn't care at all. She had everything she needed walking beside her, his hand warm in hers, his presence solid and real. The rest, the money, the property, the social position, were just details. The important part was that she was finally, truly free. 6 months later, spring had returned to the Wyoming frontier, melting the winter snows and painting the valleys with wildflowers. Eleanor stood on the porch of a sturdy log cabin built halfway up the mountain between Copper Hollow and the high country, watching the sunset paint the peaks in shades of rose and gold. Behind her, she could hear Elias moving about inside, the domestic sounds of a shared life, wood being added to the stove, the clink of dishes, his low humming of an old trapper's tune. These sounds had become her favorite music. The cabin wasn't large or fancy, but it was exactly what she'd wanted. 2 rooms with a sleeping loft, large windows that captured the mountain views, a stone fireplace that Elias had built with his own hands, shelves lined with books, her library transplanted from the big house in town, a kitchen table scarred from use, where they took their meals and where she now taught reading to the children who climbed up from town 3 afternoons a week. She'd sold the grand house to a mining consortium executive, keeping only what mattered, the land, the books, enough money to live comfortably and fund her charitable projects. The rest she'd invested in Copper Hollow itself, fulfilling her promise to build a school, improve worker housing, establish a small hospital. Martha ran most of those projects now, having discovered a talent for organization and a passion for helping others. The Northern Valley Gold Strike had indeed proven rich. Under Eleanor's management, it was being developed slowly and carefully, with attention to both profit and people. True to her word, she'd given Clayton Voss a small stake. He'd served 4 months for fraud, and upon release had quietly left the territory. She'd heard he was working as a bookkeeper in Denver, a humbled man trying to rebuild an honest life. She hoped he'd succeed. "Supper's ready," Elias called from inside. Eleanor went in to find the table set with simple fare, venison stew, fresh bread, early greens from her garden. They ate together as the light faded, talking about the day. 3 children had come for reading lessons. The youngest, only 5, determined to learn her letters. The oldest, a miner's son of 12, was already reading at a level that would have been remarkable in any school. "You're a good teacher," Elias said, sopping up stew with bread. "Those kids love coming here. I love having them. It feels like," Eleanor searched for words, "like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do. Not managing businesses or hosting social events, but actually helping people grow." Elias smiled, reaching across to take her hand. He wore a simple gold band now, matching the one on her finger. They'd married in a quiet ceremony 2 months ago, officiated by the new minister and attended only by Martha, Samuel, and a handful of close friends. No grand wedding, no elaborate celebration, just 2 people making promises they intended to keep. "I have something for you," Elias said, standing to retrieve a leather-bound book from the shelf. "Finished it last night." Eleanor took it, recognizing it as the volume of Thoreau essays she'd given him months ago. He'd been working through it slowly, sounding out unfamiliar words, discussing the ideas with her over morning coffee. "All of it?" she asked, pleased. "All of it." "Some parts twice, trying to puzzle out what he meant." Elias sat back down, looking satisfied. "That man lived alone in the woods and spent his time thinking deep thoughts. Reminds me of someone. You've gone deeper than Thoreau in many ways," Eleanor said. "He went to the woods for 2 years as an experiment. You've lived there for 30, and you learned truths he only touched on. Maybe, but I didn't write them down. Didn't know how," he paused. "Been thinking, though. Maybe I should start. Not a book or anything fancy, but just thoughts. Things I've learned about the mountains, about living simple. You could help me with the words I don't know." Eleanor felt her heart swell with love and pride. I would be honored to help you write down your wisdom, Elias Boone. They cleaned up together, another domestic ritual she'd come to cherish. Then they sat on the porch as full darkness fell, wrapped in blankets against the evening chill, watching stars emerge overhead. Do you ever miss it? Elias asked quietly. The big house, the social position, all that? Eleanor considered the question honestly. Did she miss anything about her old life? The isolation despite being surrounded by people? The constant performance of being Mrs. Thomas Whitmore? The weight of expectations and judgments? Not even a little, she said. I miss some people, Martha, though I see her weekly. Samuel, who's become a good friend. But the life itself? No, this is better. This is real, even with a husband who still stumbles over long words and prefers wilderness to parlors. She turned to look at him, this man who'd saved her in ways that had nothing to do with runaway stagecoaches and everything to do with showing her what honest living looked like, especially with that husband. Elias, you gave me 3 wishes without knowing it. The first was showing me that simple pleasures, a home-cooked meal, genuine conversation, matter more than elaborate performances. The second was teaching me that growth never stops, that learning and changing are possible at any age. And the third, she paused, emotion thick in her throat. The third was proving that I was worth protecting, worth loving, worth choosing every single day. Elias pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. You made me your 3 wishes too, showed me that isolation isn't the same as peace, that knowledge and books can open up worlds, that love is worth the risk of loss. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 souls who'd found each other against all odds. Below them, the lights of Copper Hollow twinkled like earthbound stars. Above them, the real stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. And here, in between, Eleanor Whitmore Boone had finally found her home. Not in a place, though the cabin was perfect. Not in a social position, though she'd kept enough influence to do good work. But in the arms of a man who'd asked for the simplest things and given her everything that mattered. Some acts of courage changed 2 lives forever. A runaway stagecoach. 3 humble wishes. A love that bridged 2 worlds. Eleanor had spent years as a wealthy widow, isolated by her position and her grief. Now she was simply a woman in love, a teacher of children, a partner to a good man. She'd traded silk and silver for pine and solitude, and found that the wilderness, both the mountain kind and the human kind, held more truth than any parlor ever had. As the night deepened and the mountain air grew cold, they went inside to their simple home. Elias added wood to the fire while Eleanor lit the lamps. Tomorrow would bring its own tasks, lessons to teach, business matters to handle, a life to be lived. But tonight, there was just this, warmth and light and love. The 3 things that had always mattered most. The 3 gifts they'd given each other, and it was enough. More than enough, it was everything.